Hi, you're listening to Sessions, a leadership resource from Grace City Church in Lakeland, Florida.
Well, thank you so much for checking out Sessions. My name is Andrew Gard. I'm the lead pastor here at Grace City Church, and I'm actually here today with our youth pastor for Grace City Church, and his name is Jon Laurenzo, and actually he oversees all of our ministries team as well. So thank you so much for being with me, Jon.
Glad to be here, man. It's exciting stuff.
Yeah, so one of the things that I really want to talk about today is something that I think is pretty critical, which is youth ministry. Many churches, they have youth ministries. Some newer churches, maybe like ours, don't have youth ministries, but they're interested in starting youth ministries. So I'll give a little bit of context for just our church, Grace City Church, and then I just want to have a conversation about the steps and the route that you took in order to start what we call now our Grace City Youth Church that's been going. And I'll give you a moment to kind of talk about, where that's been and how that was launched and how that was started. But as I said, our church is coming up on 2 years old. We will be 2 in late September of 2017. And so it's been an incredible ride, and we didn't really know when we would start a youth ministry or how that would play out. But maybe talk to me a little bit about, where did the idea of starting a youth ministry come from? Maybe kind of give the listener an understanding of, obviously church plants that are as young as us don't usually start youth ministries. Yeah. And so where did that come from? And, as conversations you and I were having, because it really was on our heart, obviously to reach young people. And so maybe talk a little bit about that. Where did that originate from?
Yeah, I think, the great part about our church and great part about, your and Christina's heart is that we always knew at some point we were going to do something to reach young people in our city and reach people as a part of Grace City Church. And so I think for us, our initial conversations were, as a lot of things were with the church, a lot more, big vision, a lot more theoretical of, hey, what would it look like for us to, do a youth ministry in Lakeland for our high schools, for our private schools, for our public schools. And so I think in the beginning stages, it was all a lot of dreams. And then what quickly happened is we saw that God's hand was on our church. And really the thing that I think that what I remember is you and I having conversations of looking around the room at even our interest services and being like, oh my gosh, like there are a lot of young people here. There's a lot of kids, there's a lot of families. And I think for us, as a lot of things were at our church, it just kind of got fast forwarded, our timeline without, in our eyes and our minds. And so I think from us, what it really started as was, okay, what would it look like as a gathering? Was it weekly? Was it monthly? Was it city groups for us to start a youth ministry? And I think it all came from the heart, really, is that we want to take care of families in our city and take care of families in our church. And when we saw who was coming here, there was just so many young people that we said, hey, at some point we've got to do something, to kind of get this thing going. And that was really what we began with, is the mindset of, hey, we're going to be a church that young people are found in the house of God.
It's amazing. And talk about, so when you're, getting ready to start a youth ministry, now we'll talk about kind of how you actually did it first, or in a little bit, but maybe talk first about how do you cast vision for something that doesn't exist. Now, obviously we had to do it for the church. Then once the church launches, the church launches. But then when you're starting to gather leaders, when you're starting to maybe think about things, talk a little bit about how to cast vision for something that doesn't really exist. Whereas before, you've been on another staff where you go into something. Yeah. And a lot of people, if they're going to be a youth pastor at a church, they'll go into a youth ministry that's already existing. But maybe talk a little bit about that. How do you cast vision for something that doesn't exist?
Yeah, I think that we're in an environment where like vision is just such a huge thing about what our team does, whatever role you're in. If you're on a staff role at our church, like you've got to be able to cast big vision. And I think when you're pioneering something brand new, that has been like the name of the game, is are we going to cast a vision that's big enough that people can buy into and people can get behind? And so I think for me, it was always about, hey, I want us, and really my heartbeat, as a pastor, as someone who feels called to ministry, was I want to create a place where young people from a very young age can be found in the house of God. So we geared it all through that. Even when we necessarily didn't have the specifics, a timeline, things like that, it was like, hey, we feel like people's lives can be completely different from middle school, high school, elementary school. They're found in the house of God. And so that was what our vision really was in the beginning, was, me finding people that I thought, hey, maybe you'd be passionate about this.
Right.
Maybe you wouldn't be. And I just think you're an awesome leader.
Right.
Maybe I think, I see it on your life. And I think that, the thing we all did in the beginning, but especially me, was just cast a huge net of like, hey, I'm just going to try to get as many people bought into this vision, even if there's nothing really to come to yet other than devotions with me or a lunch with me or, a team night. As we got a little bit closer to it, it was really just, hey, what would it look like for us to, really in our city get in the way of some young people going to hell and really screwing up their lives, and that was really our heart in the beginning. And the vision, I think when it went that big, it was like, hey, that's a big vision people can get behind. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what for you, so you're looking at, doing this, starting a youth ministry, what for you would be a successful youth ministry? Like, if I were to tell you, okay, what for you is a successful youth ministry, maybe some youth pastors listening or pastors in general that are on staff at churches, how would you define, oh man, when I wanted to pastor a youth ministry, this is how I would have defined success? Yeah,
I think the number one thing, I was just, raised up in a very healthy youth ministry culture, both by you and by other mentors and pastors in my life, was the biggest thing for our youth ministry is it has to fulfill the vision of the senior pastor. I think that's one of the number one things I see other guys that are in my spot make a mistake, is that they've got huge vision. They've got vision of this or this or this, and it's not what their senior pastor's heart was. And so I think that was the beginning, was sitting down with you and Christina and saying, hey, what do you guys see for youth ministry? And then because we come from a similar mindset, I was like, okay, well, this really seems like it would be in your guys' heart and in your vision for that. But I think the biggest principles, which I've from the beginning wanted to create our foundation on, was that we were a youth ministry for everybody, not a youth ministry just for people that know God or know our church. I think that was even down to the name of Grace City Youth Church. And I from the beginning was hammering into people, hey, we're a youth church, not a youth group. Our mindset was that, hey, a youth group is going to be for people that come to our church, whose families come to our church, who if new people show up to it, they look at them sideways and say, why are you here? And that just was the opposite of what we wanted to create. And so I think those are the big success points that we're always going back to. It's an old thing that I really got taught in the beginning of ministry by our senior pastor back in Seattle, was we're going to know and be known by our community. I think that's the thing I'm constantly coming back to in our youth ministry is, are we known by our community? Do we know our public schools? Do we know our private schools? Do we know the pulse of our city? I think that's the biggest thing for us. The temptation of youth ministry I've seen even since the beginning is to become inward focused and to focus on who's already coming rather than constantly looking outside.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a really good point. I think sometimes probably for lead pastors, especially for lead pastors that have planted a church maybe within 5, 6, 7 years, and maybe they don't have a youth ministry yet. Youth ministries aren't necessarily free to do. They're not the cheapest thing in the world. And so, I would just encourage maybe anybody who's listening or anybody who is maybe a senior pastor or something like that, who's thinking through, how to, if they even want to do this, because it's going to be another cost. I know for me, I can say, one, because your heart was, oh man, we want to serve, the house, right? We want to serve the big picture, of what God's doing at Grace City Church. We've seen multiple people come to the church actually through the youth ministry. Totally. So we've seen a lot of kids that come and they end up bringing their parents who don't go to church to our church on a Sunday. And so I just think that it's amazing. I think youth ministries are always strong when they serve the picture, the big picture of everything that is going on. Talk to me a little bit about, I know, obviously, you people listening probably don't know this, but, you interned, with myself and Chad Veach and Roger Archer at Puyallup Foursquare Church and did a ministry institute there. And then you graduated from Northwest University. Talk about, where your ideas for youth ministry come from. Obviously, some of it is stuff you've learned, and then some of the stuff is stuff you've prayed through and thought through. And so maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was really awesome to be able to go right when I graduated high school, and really right when I gave my life to Jesus, to be involved in a really healthy, and not just a really incredible youth and young adults ministry that you and Chad led right after high school. And so I think from the beginning, I had a vision of what youth ministry could be, which was a place for high school students and middle school students that they felt like they could be themselves, and they felt like, they could invite their friends to. But I think a lot of so much of ministry, I think sometimes guys like work too hard to recreate the real wheel.
Right.
There was a reason why youth ministry worked then, and even it was only 7 or 8 years ago I was serving in it. So a lot of the stuff that we do in terms of our service order, our small group model, is a lot of stuff where I'm like, I'm not going to try to reinvent this because I know it works.
Right.
I know young people like this stuff. But I think for me, there's been a lot of influences in the way that I understand ministry. A lot of it has been time that we've gotten to spend as a Hillsong family church learning. I just obviously think the world of what Hillsong does and think that they're doing an incredible job. And so I think a lot of my personal philosophy of youth ministry has been influenced obviously a ton by you and Chad and that mindset, but also just getting around guys that are doing, incredible stuff in our community and really in our country.
Yeah.
I think for me, some really huge conversations, some really huge thought process stuff happened when we launched GCYC through Brad Cooper, who's a guy, youth pastor up at New Spring Church, really took an amazing amount of time to help me think through our vision, through our mindset. And then Mark Pettis as well, who's at the Church of the Highlands in Alabama, who are really probably, I think, the two of the strongest youth ministries in America. Yeah. And I think that was a little bit of updating stuff. That was, okay, I haven't been a part of launching something in a really long time or really ever, honestly. And so I think that was...
Yeah, me and Chad are old senior pastors now, so yeah.
but yeah, I think that was a lot of the stuff. But I think, my encouragement to guys out there that are listening to this is there are things you want to get creative in, and then there's things that you're going to burn yourself out trying to recreate. And I think there are some things that work really well, and you got to know your context. That was a big deal for us, is I think the tendency can be to look at guys that are in New York City or in Los Angeles or in London, and they're doing things. But I don't live in London. I live in Lakeland, where it's, a very hometown community. It's a very suburban and urban community, but it's just different. You got to know your context. And I think that was our one temptation as a team, was to look at, oh my gosh, Hillsong New York does this, and this is so cool. But I wanted to look at guys that were in Birmingham or in Anderson, South Carolina, because that's a little more like my context.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I always get concerned whenever I'm talking to anybody and they're starting something and they're like, oh, we're going to do it, and nobody's doing it like this. I'm always thinking, there's a reason why nobody's doing it like that.
Totally.
And so I think, you always have to be careful whenever you're preaching anything or doing anything as a strategy that nobody else is preaching. I've never heard it preached like that. There's probably a reason why you've never heard it preached like that.
Sure.
And so I think that's great. Yeah, I think there are guys that have created a model that works, that you can learn from, contextualize it, and then walk it out. I think that's great. So let's get really practical. So how did our youth ministry really practically start? Talk about that.
Yeah, I think you always, for me, the biggest thing for us was we started with small groups. It's like that is just the easiest thing you can do, no matter where you're at. Yep. You can start age-specific small groups. No matter if your church is ready to have a youth ministry or they're not, you can start age-specific small groups. So we started gender and age-specific small groups. We did a middle school boys, middle school girls, high school boys, high school girls, and that was what our church started with. And the great thing about that too is that began to build our leadership team. Is you get to find guys that are passionate and ladies that are passionate about being a youth leader and leading youth discipleship. And so I think that was the beginnings. Yeah. And both those groups filled up very quickly with our church. And so then we started looking at, multiplying our groups and saying, okay, what if we did 2 high school ones or 2 this? And then from there, practically, Andrew and I sat down and said, okay, let's start with a monthly gathering. And that's a huge thing in America in youth ministry. Now, a lot of guys are going to monthly gatherings. And so I think the thing that I saw from churches that do that best is they're great at systems. They're great at that. And I think for us, my biggest encouragement for anyone listening to this would be find what you bring to the table, and then whatever way you can package that, do it. And so for us, we started with monthly gatherings, and there was like an uproar for our kids of like, we got done with a monthly gathering and I told them, okay, I'll see you next month. And they looked at me like I was speaking a different language. Like they looked at us like they didn't understand it. And so for me, I quickly realized with a little bit of your help and a little bit of your prodding in the right direction that monthly gathering was not going to be the way in our city that was going to be most effective. I think for us, what we do really well, and what I just honestly, what our church does really well is worship, is experience. And so for us, the way I package that most often is with a weekly service. The way I put that in front of people the most often is a weekly service. And so we did monthly services for 2 months, and then we launched weekly services at the end of April in 2016.
It's great. And so it's been going for how long now?
15 or 16 months. Okay. Yeah, about 15 months.
Okay. What's been the 15, 16 months? What has been the biggest challenge? Obviously, incredible fruit. has come out of that. Incredible weekly services, kids in city groups, all that kind of stuff. But what's been maybe give me your top like one or two challenges, or maybe something that surprised you that you were like, man, this thing just kind of hit me on the chin.
Totally. I think that the thing that I had to learn, you've got to understand where your church's culture is at. That was like the most shocking thing to me in doing this was our church's culture was a year old. And so our youth ministry's culture was way behind that, was steps behind that. And so there's things that, I would be really honest, the majority of what I did in the first year was fight culture battles, was build culture into our team. And so that was what really shocked me, I think, the most, of having to, basic leadership things that I think everyone should understand as a part of Grace City Church was just not there, not a part of it, not even on people's minds. And so, I think that is just a constant battle. Yeah. But the thing that I think you always encourage us as a team and really encouraged me in this journey was that if you can build the right culture, you're going to take care of so many problems down the road. Yep. I think that was my call to action was, hey, I'm going to build this now, and it's going to be hard, and it's going to be, pints of blood, hours of sweat, hours of meetings. But now, 15 months in, I can say, okay, we really have taken a lot of steps in building our culture. Now, of course, we're not exactly where we want to be, but I think that was definitely the thing that I had never had to build my own culture. Right. And I think that's the one thing that guys don't realize. And it doesn't matter how many times I serve, doesn't matter if I preach, doesn't matter if I was a heavily involved youth leader. Building your own culture is a lot of people out here listening, I'm sure you've been swimming in somebody else's wake. You've been riding someone else's wave for a long time, and having to create your own is just a whole different ball game. Yep. So that for sure has been the number one thing for us that I had to do this year.
That's great. So you talked about it a little bit, but maybe touch on just a little bit more. How does youth ministry play a role in like the larger church family? Because I think sometimes, part of the reason why, people are moving towards the once a month thing is, because sometimes if you don't get kids ingratiated in the church, they might love their youth ministry, but they haven't necessarily cultivated a love for the church, and sometimes it's not even just that local church, but just the church in general. Yeah. So talk about maybe youth ministry's role, kind of in that whole grand scheme of things and in the larger local church family.
Yeah, so I think it takes on purpose mindset on our Wednesday nights to push kids towards Sundays. I'd make a point of pretty much every Wednesday night when I get up there to start preaching, of inviting young people to the weekend service, of talking about you and Christina, saying, hey, they send their love, they're so glad, this is their church, they're the ones that started this church a few years ago. And so I think it's an on purpose thing, and it's something that takes time. For us, really this summer, after our summer camp is when I think we really hit a tipping point of young people actually serving in our church. And it took a year. I never wasn't talking about it, but it took a year of kids feeling like, oh, this is my church. This is something I'm a part of. But I think the role that youth ministry can play when it's healthy in the church is incredible. I think that, you look around our team, even our staff, and the people who are there really got their call of ministry when they were in high school or they were in middle school of serving the church and giving their life to something that's bigger than themselves. I think that the number one thing that I would say from being around students that our young generation, the people that we're working with, people that probably the generation that I'm in as well, is they are deathly afraid of not being the biggest thing in their world. And the church combats that. You can't be the biggest thing in your world when you serve at a church.
It's come and die.
Yeah, totally. And so I think that when youth ministry is healthy, man, it's the greatest feeder, it's the greatest volunteer pool, it's the greatest way to get people involved. And I think it all came from the heart of, we want to raise up healthy families at our church, which was, your and Christina's heart from the beginning. And so I think that plays a huge part in it.
That's amazing, man. That's such great stuff. I want to end with kind of just a couple questions. I want you to talk to a couple groups of people. Number one, talk to the person at a smaller church or maybe a church plant that is, maybe they're over youth. They might not even be full-time, right? Because, even when you started the youth ministry here, you weren't a full-time employee. You had another job. And so maybe talk to that person and maybe encourage them, a little bit of, hey, they're at a smaller church, they're doing another job, and they're trying to look after the youth. Or they're at a church plant and they're frustrated because it's like, oh man, I wish we had, what that established church up the road who's been going for 20 years has. Maybe talk to that person.
Totally. I think, the biggest thing that you always are saying to our team, and I would say to you guys out there, man, is you're doing better than you think you are. Yeah. I think it's way too easy to get discouraged in youth ministry. I think I would encourage you, get off social media. Don't compare yourself to what other people are doing. And one thing that I've just seen, ministry in my own life and in my own heart, I've always said peace is when comparison is not a part of it. And you've just got to understand that stewardship is the best thing you can do in taking care of the kids that God gave you, taking care of the relationships that God gave you. There always is going to be someone that's bigger than better than you. And that's the way it should be. I think in church, you always have someone that you're looking to for inspiration, but don't compare where you're at to them. I think that was our biggest thing is, we're so blessed to have a building, even though we're a church that is as old as we are, but in the past year, it seemed like it was almost like a running joke on Wednesday nights that something would be going wrong with the building, the air conditioning, there'd be reconstruction in the auditorium on Wednesdays and things like that. And so we just had to look at it and say, hey, man, we're way good. We love what we're doing. And I think that would be my encouragement to you, man, is that you're doing better than you think you are out there, whoever you are out there. In addition to that, just take care of what God's put right in front of you. Go after the relationships you have, build the team you have, take care of the students that you do have. And God's always faithful to give you more, I think, when you have that mindset. Yeah.
Sometimes that inclination is to think about the kids that aren't there more than the kids that are there.
Totally.
And I think sometimes, I know early on in my ministry life, I found myself doing that a lot. You're hanging out at the back door and service is already starting, and instead of modeling worship at the front, you're standing in the back going, man, I hope like 4 more kids come. I hope 8 more kids come.
Totally.
And I think that can be a real thing. Maybe lastly, talk to maybe the YP that's frustrated at his lead pastor, and his lead pastor doesn't get it, and maybe encourage that person a little bit.
Yeah.
Or at least in their own mind, their lead pastor doesn't get it.
Yeah, totally. I think I was raised in a ministry culture of where our senior pastor was the one that God, appointed, anointed for our city and for this church. And so you've got to, understand that you're a part of somebody's staff. And if they have a blessing on you to do the youth ministry, praise God. Yeah. But I think, one thing that would just be really practical is I think just set up a meeting with your senior pastor and let them know where you're at. And I think just ask them what their vision is for the youth ministry. I think that one thing I love about you and my relationship is I always feel like I can come to you, ask you questions, and not even just that, but just say, hey, this is what's going on. This is what we're doing. I think the majority of, animosity or majority of battles that happen between youth pastor and senior pastor are usually because of a lack of communication and them feeling like, well, I don't even know what that guy does over there. I don't even know what's happening on Wednesday nights. And so I think that would be the biggest thing of just, hey man, you got to meet with them. You got to know where they're at. You got to, find out what maybe their heart is for youth, and you just got to stay faithful. Like ultimately, I think God just honors faithfulness, and it really comes down to, in my mind, I feel like I've been taught a lot this in our Grace City journey and our GCYC journey is, do you believe that God's in control? Because if you do, then it's not about people. It's not about your pastor not believing in you. It's not about this, that, or the other. It's, do you believe that God sees you and that God's in control? Because if you believe that and you trust that, I think these kind of things are a lot more just like, hey, this is just a daily thing. This is me doing, this is doing what I'm called to do.
No doubt.
And also, just know your role, man. I mean, know where you're at. I think that's that. I know I'm rambling a little bit here, but I think that is one huge thing of just know where you're at. Don't compare seasons. You're a youth pastor right now.
No doubt. Well, man, I appreciate you, and I'm so grateful to have you on the team and the way you serve our young people and the way you serve our church at large.
Thank you.
And I think this is really helpful. And again, if you're listening, you're a youth pastor or somebody that has a passion to be a youth pastor, man, I think a lot of this stuff that Jon is saying you can take to the bank. And so thanks so much for spending some time with me, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yep.
Thank you for listening to Sessions, a leadership resource from Grace City Church. Find out more about Grace City at gracecityfl.com.